Welcome to the channel. I'm Rob, and today we're going to be painting a White Scars Terminator. Welcome back, everybody. So, yeah, White Scars. So I thought we'd do something a little bit interesting, and we will mix some uniform grey with some Broodmother Purple, all from the Armour Painter, of course. And the reason I'm doing this, and the reason I'm adding purple in, is because I've seen White Scars shaded in lots of different ways, and I haven't seen them shaded with purple before. And I didn't want a really harsh or dark purple, so mixing it with grey felt like the best of both worlds. So you saw at the beginning of the video how the Terminator turns out. This won't be it won't look purple. It's not like we're painting Emperor's Children or something like that. But what I would say is that it does add interest to the overall white rather than just being a grey and then building up from white, which you've seen me do before. So I just think this is a more interesting way to go about doing a white. You don't have to use purple, you could use any colour, you could use browns or reds, but mixing it with grey I think is a good idea. This is just a 50-50 mix, and it looks super purple on the camera and on the video as I'm watching it, but in reality it's not quite that bad. But we're going to go straight to matte white, and I've included all the footage here so you can see me build up the layers of matte white. And I've mixed this just with a little bit of airbrush thinner from the Armour Painter, which has a little bit of flow improver in. And I'm basically giving it a directional lighting source from the front, and then I'll do one from the back as well. But we're basically really focusing on the volumes of the miniature. We've got these kind of boulder-like shoulders, which are great spheres to build kind of your lighting around, and then the legs, we just treat them as cylinders, as I've talked before in previous videos. Make sure you do that kind of bolter casing as well. That's going to be an important element. But because the white is quite thin, we just build it up in thin layers, and that way we can get a gradual progression from that grey purple colour that we laid down, and then to a very kind of like bright white. And this airbrush I'm using is a decent airbrush. It's quite precise, but even if you don't have an airbrush like mine, you can be careful, you can be quite precise with it, just adjusting your trigger control and the pressure on the airbrush as well. But as you can see, that purple color that we started with is now just fading into the background. That purple grey color is just fading, and we've got a really bright white. Now this will be knocked back an awful lot, and what do you do if you don't have an airbrush? Well, this kind of scheme is always going to be difficult, right? But you could just use a rattle can white and then carry on with the steps from here. But it's just good to mix it up. I've done a non-airbrush, just sponging White Scars video in my last video, so I thought I'd do an airbrush one for you guys for this one here. So after we're done with our white, and after you feel like you've got good contrast on the model, and after you've kind of built it up, we're then going to go to some of the details. Now, this is actually quite a quick model to paint because we're going to use lots of speed paints here. So we're going to use blood red. Now, blood red is good because it's actually quite a good matching colour to the transfers that I'm going to be using a little bit later from Games Workshop, the old Forge World range. Not that Forge World exists kind of anymore. You can buy it from Forge World. Now, because you are going over white, just be super careful. This is going to be, you're going to need to be precise here. You're going to need to be super careful. You're going to need a small paintbrush to do this. You really can't afford to get it onto the white. If you do, you can correct it, but it's a bit of a hassle. Trying to mix and match those colours, considering that we've airbrushed them. You can always hide it with battle damage, right? But yeah, just something to bear in mind. These flow, they're speed paints, they flow super easily. That's the whole point of them. But as a result, when doing anything over white, just be careful. Now, this looks super bright on the camera, but it does dry duller than this, or at least less vibrant than this, so don't worry about it kind of matching with the transfers. The transfers I'm going to use are actually much duller than this kind of wet paint that's going on at the moment, but it's a really nice color. I've used it for my own White Scars. I've done a jet bike squad recently, if you're a Horus Heresy player, for an Alpha Legion kind of rewards of treason unit, But you know, I really recommend this because I think it's a great colour for doing White Scars trim. It just doesn't take a lot of time. You know, helmets, backpacks, things like that, and it just goes into all the recesses in the way that you would expect a speed paint to go into them. I find that with speed paints, say over contrast paints, I find they flow better. Is one of the reasons why I prefer them. And obviously this video is in partnership with Army Painter, but I would, you know, in most circumstances, I would always choose speed paints over contrast paints because of the way that they flow. Certainly Grim Black, you know, here, I would do any of my own models, not just the models that I'm doing, you know, for these videos. I would do any of my own models and the rubberized texturing in between armor plates with Grim Black because it's a great paint. It flows really nicely, gives a good dull kind of grey over those elements. So Ashen Stone and Grim Black, we're going to make a mixture here. You can see me kind of just working out. It's about a 50-50 mix, but I just wanted a dark grey. But I quite like that colour of that Ashen Stone, and you can see me adding a little bit more black into it. But this is perfect, right? We want to make it like a stone colour, and the white is such a great base to work from whenever you're using these speed paints. But we're just going to pretend like this is kind of like an element of stone. I don't really know what it's meant to be, whether it's meant to be metal or whatever. I think they're meant to have, you know, parts of the Emperor's armour in or shards in, from what I remember. But from most of the artwork I've seen, you know, it's kind of like this stone colour. And you know, you could leave it like this. You could just give it one coat if you wanted. We'll, in the next part of the video, we'll talk about how we can kind of take that to the next level. But one coat is enough. You know, that's what these speed paints are designed for. But what I've done is I've actually mixed in a little bit of white with that speed paint mix of Grim Black and Ashen Stone. And you can see me here just highlighting it. So this is just white mixed into that speed paint. And I'm just adding volumes to it where the light would hit according to you know, the volumes where I've done the airbrushing. And you know, you've got to do the knee pad as well. But I just felt that this, you know, these were focal points of the model, the Crux Terminatus on the knee pad and the shoulder pad. And you can see here each time I'm just adding a little bit more white into the mix. It's that airbrush white that I'm using, I'm mixing in. So it's quite thin. But you know, it layers relatively quite nicely. So just hitting the tops of the Crux Terminatus just to give it a little bit of definition, and I'll do the same with the red as well. So with that blood red, I've just mixed in a little bit of white. It kind of creates, you know, I guess the equivalent color would be something like Wild Rider red if you were talking in a kind of Games Workshop terms. But it certainly wasn't a pink. It was more tended towards like a salmon rose color or you know, very, very pale orange color. But it was actually quite nice to highlight with. And I think it just did the skull on the chest and then the edges on the bolter as well. And then the helmet. The helmet, if you're going to do any places, the helmet's, I think, the most important bit, just because it just renders it quite nicely. But these are all optional steps. You don't have to do this. If you don't want to, you don't have to highlight these parts. You know, the speed paint does the heavy lifting for you. So we're going to gloss varnish the model now through the airbrush. You won't see me actually gloss varnish it, but I gloss varnish it. And this is just going to protect our model for the oils to come, but also it's just going to help the transfers lay down. Now, I've talked loads about transfers in my previous video, about the rationale why I use gloss varnish in my previous videos. But what I will say here is that you want transfers to look painted on. You don't want them to have a ring around the outside, and you don't want them to be shiny against, say, the matte of the armour. And laying this down over a gloss varnish, you're laying it down over a smooth surface is the most important thing. You know, when you airbrush or paint a colour on, you know, if you were to zoom in with a microscope, it's not a smooth surface. So you get tiny little air bubbles underneath because you're laying a sticker essentially over the top of a non-smooth surface. And that's where problems can come from, tiny little air bubbles appearing, and it won't look very nice. So doing it this way, putting the gloss varnish down, smooths that surface, and it will help the transfer lay flat, and it will stop any awkward bubbles from appearing as well. Now, my recommendation, and lots of people have argued with me online about it before, about whether you should or shouldn't, or whether it's right or wrong. Basically, this is how I do it. And at the end of the video, when we see kind of like the 360 of this, you'll see that the transfers look painted on. There isn't a ring around them. There's no air bubbles within them. So I'm confident in the way that I go about doing it. You do it however you think is best to do it. This is just my way, and I think it works for me, is the thing I would say. So I'm using micro set and micro sol. So the micro set goes down first. Then you put the transfer over the top, and then leave it for a while, 10-15 minutes. I think I went to go have a snack in between these parts, and then the micro sol goes down, and then just with a Q-tip or a cotton wool bud or an earbud or whatever you call it, you can just gently, very, very gently roll it over the transfer, just getting rid of the air bubbles underneath, just letting it adhere, letting it lay flat. So once that's fully dried and once it looks nice and smooth, I'm then going to use dark stone. Great color for white battle damage, not as harsh as something like oak brown or say like a Rhinox hide equivalent, very, very dark brown. This is just like a Charadon granite, that old school Charadon granite that used to exist back in the day. Great equivalent to that, and great for weathering, doing battle damage on white, to show that ceramite underneath. You can see me here doing a mixture of sponging, but also doing a little mixture of a little bit of kind of like edging with a brush as well. I haven't used any edge highlights apart from on the Crux Terminatus. I didn't really use edge highlights on that really, but apart from on the helmet. So I can afford to spend a bit of time just doing some rough, quite scratchy stuff with a paintbrush here, but you don't have to. Again, this is kind of an optional step really. You can do the battle damage just with a sponge and keep it like that, but you can just add in some scratches, some edges as well. I haven't edged every single line, just where I thought that there might be maximum kind of scratching from all the fighting and walking and deep striking that they're doing, but I'm also considering where I put this down, these little extra scratches, where I can have kind of streaking from all this battle damage coming down as well. So we're going to use oil paints. If you've not used them, don't worry. I'm going to talk you through how to use them. So I've got burnt umber, Payne's grey, and then a violet colour. What was it? Dioxine purple. So these are some of my go-to oil paints, and you can see that I'm mix and matching between brands, just because of the way over time that I've bought them. I do rate Winsor & Newton, but the Dowland Rounding one is just as good, right? You don't have to use oil paints, but I find that they give like quite a gritty look to the model and feel to the model that I quite like, and also they're quite easy to clean up as well. So I've just got a little bit of white spirit here, and then I'm just mixing the oil paints together, a little bit of each of those three that we'd seen previously, but then I was like, you know what, this is way too dark for white armor, so I added a little bit of white oil paint in there as well, and you can just see me adding a little bit of brown until I get to a color that I think this reflects. This would be a good recess wash, basically. So I've got this kind of muddy purpley color to match with the armor, but also to reflect the fact that we might have kind of grime and dirt building up. Now when it goes down, it's actually quite hard to see the purple within it, but that's okay, it's there. It looks quite nice at the end, and it just shows an accumulation of dirt and grime and dust. So I'm a big fan of mixing oil paints together, seeing what unusual colors you can get. But you could just use a burnt umber, you could just use a Payne's grey, but I like to mix and match, to get various different shades and tones within the colours, and to make my own colours as well. So because this has been gloss varnished, so I've gloss varnished for a second time after all the battle damage has been done, to protect all the battle damage and protect all the transfers as well. Basically, the oil paints just go into all the recesses, and you can clean it up with a cotton wool bud soaked in white spirits, but it's really simple to clean up. And this took no time at all to dry as well. Took about 10 minutes, and I just blasted it with a hairdryer for a few seconds, and it's good to go. I wanted to create some streaking to show that it's been raining, and this person's been, well, this Space Marine's been on campaign for some time. So I'm just going to use straight up burnt umber, and you can see me putting neat burnt umber on just above scratches, and then taking a fan brush dipped in some white spirit and just dragging it down in the direction that the rain would go. And would fall on the model, and then that dragging that down just creates streaking effects, creates a little bit of interest on the armor. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get in with a fan brush, I would say. So this bit on the leg took me ages to get right. I had to fiddle around with it, even on camera, to go backwards and forwards with a fan brush with a normal brush. So sometimes they'll take a while, but the great thing about it is you can just, because it's glossed, you can just wipe it away. You can start again if you want to, and you can see here I was like, oh, I'm just gonna have to start again, basically. Like I'll just wick it away, and it just kept on going wrong. But that's great. That's what's great about using oils. It's not like one of those things where if I was to do this with a paint and it goes wrong, I'm like, oh no, I've got to start again. I can wick it away, do it again and again and again until I'm happy with it. I would say my success rate with streaking, get it on the first time, is probably about 80%. 20% of the time I don't get it right and have to mess around with it. So this is what it looks like. We're going to give it a matte varnish. Great matte varnish this. If you're looking for a matte varnish, airbrush matte varnish, I'd really recommend this one. Doesn't kill completely the vibrancy of the colours, but it gives it that really gritty matte look that lots of gamers want to their miniatures. We'll talk about metallics later. I'm not matting down any metallics. I'll leave that till afterwards, because I want the shininess of the metallics. I don't want to kill completely the shine of the metallics here. And then I think just going to blast it with a hairdryer, and you can see kind of the change that happens to it. So yeah, really great matte varnish. Really would recommend if you're looking for an alternative to the other ones on the market. Goes a long way. That, yeah, it's lasted me a long time as well. So Broadsword Silver, we'll be using that in a minute, but before we do that, what I'm going to do is areas that are going to be silver, I'm just giving it a really rough, essentially overbrush, because that Broadsword Silver was in fact it was a speed paint, and we're going to utilize its speed paint effects. But because it's a speed paint, what we want to do is just make sure that all the areas are nice and light. And I guess what I'm trying to do here is make it as light as possible for the speed paint to have the maximum amount of kind of effect, essentially. So Broadsword Silver, worth getting hold of. I quite like this. If you're trying to do quick jobs on Space Marines, or I don't know, I guess Age of Sigmar models or something, it flows really, really nicely. You can see there just on the faceplate, it was just one coat. But because it's a speed paint, all those edges kind of stand out. And I've got a Hoplite Gold here, and I'm doing the same on this little kind of emblem. And I'm going to use a wash. I felt like it needed to be a little bit darker, so using a bit of dark tone here. What's good about these, if you've not used them before, is that they don't dry matte. They don't kill the shine of the metallics. Let's have a look at the eye lenses now. So we're going to use these two paints. So we've got Crystal Blue and Ionic Blue. And I paint the eye lens black, then white, and then I'm just going over it, that white area with Crystal Blue. These are air paints, and I want them to be quite thin because I want the white to show up underneath. I don't want it to. I'm not building over black. I want them to be quite vibrant. So building from a white base helps the eye lenses to be vibrant. Then I'm just doing a further highlight with the Ionic Blue. And then, if you can hear my dog in the background, I do apologise. And then I mixed a little bit of Ionic Blue with a little bit of white and just a dot at the front of the eyes just to make it super bright as well. A dry brush, once that wash has dried, just giving it a little dry brush with a bit of silver. and then onto the base. That's it. Done for the marine. Onto the base. I'm using one of Armour Painter's kind of basing kits that they've sent me. I'm mainly using this for the sand, as you can see in the basing glue. I suppose it's not sand; it's more like grit. I would describe it as. So I just put the PVA glue, the basing glue, on the base, then put the kind of like the grit, and then I'm just using a bit of weathering powders here. I'm just using a mix of oranges and reds. Just like I had them lying around. I thought they would be quite nice tones. Built within that sand. I didn't seal it. I didn't need to because I was mushing it in. I didn't worry that it was going to come off the base, but you can just see it just works quite well with all those tones of that kind of like that grit. Just makes the base more interesting. And then I'm going to use some Army Painter Highland Tufts, and basically I just take the tuff, dip it in a bit of the glue, the same basing glue that I was using before, just on the bottom. They have tacky bottoms, but this sounds quite rude, that, doesn't it? A tacky bottom. They have tacky bottoms already, but this is just to make sure it stays down. And I, filled the base with about 5 or 6 of these, dotted them around, made it look fairly even around the base, fairly symmetrical around the base. And the final thing we've got to do is just do the rim. You can either choose a brown or a black. I think a black base rim looks a little bit more classy than brown, but whatever your choice is absolutely fine. And that is essentially it. We are essentially done. I mean, it's good to have a look at the 360 of the model as we go through here. We will have a kind of a final look at the model in a moment. But a relatively simple way to go about creating white, very limited edge highlights, a bit of dry brushing here and there on the silvers, mainly focusing on speed paints, so it didn't take us a lot of time. There's real depth to those reds, I think. And then the most interesting part, and you can see the final model here, the most interesting part, in my opinion, is the fact that we've got those greyish purple tones within that white. And I think that just makes it so much more interesting than just, say, building up from grey. Now, I've built up from grey previously in previous videos, and that's fine, but I think that this is a cool way to go about doing white scars or doing any kind of white. Just makes it really interesting. So, give it a go, spike your colours, spike your greys with a colour, see what you can come up with, and let me know what you think of this tutorial. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you on the next one.